No cameras were supposed to be there. That was the point. Private studio conference room. Thick glass walls. City noise muted to a distant hum. Leather chairs pushed back slightly, like the room had already felt tension before anyone sat down. Dwayne Johnson arrived first. Not early. Not late. Exactly on time. He didn't check his phone. Didn't pace. He stood by the window, hands relaxed at his sides, looking out over Los Angeles like someone who had already survived every version of this moment. Then the door opened. Arnold Schwarzenegger walked in. Older. Heavier in presence, not weight. A man whose shadow had once defined an entire generation. He didn't rush either. He scanned the room once, the way men do when they're used to being the reference point. 2 generations. Same room. No introductions were needed. They shook hands. Firm. Respectful. Brief. No smiles yet. The producer cleared his throat, started explaining why they were all there. Something about legacy. About passing the torch. About how the audience wanted to see them together. Dwayne listened. Arnold listened differently. At one point, Arnold leaned back and said something that wasn't meant to challenge, but did. In my time, he said. You earned the room before you controlled it. The words hung there longer than expected. Everyone waited for Dwayne to respond. He didn't. He nodded once. Slow. Thoughtful. Then he said quietly, That's why I don't need to earn it again. Silence. Not awkward. Final. The producer shifted in his seat. This wasn't in the plan. Arnold studied Dwayne now, not defensively but carefully. Like he'd just realized this wasn't a conversation about comparison. It was about transition. And that was the moment the room changed. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The kind of pause that feels heavier than a speech. Arnold didn't look away. He held the silence the way he'd held stages for decades. Calm, unhurried, letting the room decide who would blink first. Dwayne didn't blink. He stayed relaxed, shoulders loose, eyes steady. Not defiant, not eager, just present. Like he wasn't trying to win the moment, he was confirming it. The producer tried to rescue the tone. This is exciting, he said with a forced laugh. 2 legends. Arnold raised a hand slightly, stopping him without even turning his head. His eyes stayed on Dwayne. Tell me something, Arnold said. Do you think this industry made you? Dwayne answered without heat. No, he said. It rented me. I bought myself back. The words landed like a door closing. Someone in the room shifted in their chair. Pen stopped tapping. The air got cleaner, sharper. Arnold's mouth tightened, not anger, recognition. He'd seen this type of certainty before. Not common. Not in actors. In champions. You talk like a businessman, Arnold said. Dwayne nodded. Because I learned what happens when you don't. Another pause. Arnold leaned forward slightly, forearms on the table. The conversation had turned. No longer polite. No longer scripted. What was the moment? He asked. The one that changed you. Dwayne looked at the table for a beat, as if choosing what to reveal. Then he said, A contract. Arnold's eyebrows lifted. A contract. 1 sentence, Dwayne replied. Now the room leaned in without realizing it. Arnold waited. Dwayne continued, voice low. They offered everything. Money, marketing, a role built to look like respect. He paused. And then I read the line that proved they still wanted control. Arnold's eyes narrowed slightly. And you signed anyway? Dwayne shook his head. No, he said. I stood up. Silence returned. But this time it wasn't tension. It was anticipation. Because Arnold Schwarzenegger wasn't just listening now. He was measuring. And he was about to test Dwayne in a way no one expected. Arnold leaned back again, slower this time. Not retreating. Repositioning. You know, he said. A lot of men walk away once. Very few can do it twice. The room went still. Dwayne understood immediately. This wasn't about that old contract anymore. This was about the future. About whether the man across from him would bend when the stakes were higher. People think legacy is built by staying, Arnold continued. It's not. It's built by knowing when to leave and when to return. He turned his head slightly, finally acknowledging the others in the room. This project, he said, doesn't need two strong men. Then his eyes came back to Dwayne. It needs one clear decision-maker. The producer swallowed. That wasn't in the deck. That wasn't in the plan. Everyone waited for Dwayne to respond. This was the moment most careers cracked. When respect quietly demanded submission. Dwayne didn't rush. He placed his palms on the table. Not leaning. Grounding. If this becomes about hierarchy, he said calmly, it won't work. Arnold smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't show teeth. And if it doesn't? He asked. Then it becomes about responsibility, Dwayne replied. And I don't share responsibility unless I share control. No aggression. No challenge. Just a line drawn cleanly. Arnold studied him for a long moment. The silence stretched again. But it felt different now. Less like pressure. More like evaluation. Finally, Arnold nodded once. Good, he said. That means you're not here to play my role. He stood up. Everyone else stayed seated. Arnold extended his hand again. This time, the grip lingered a second longer. Then let's not make history by repeating it, he said. Let's make it by changing how it's handed over. Dwayne shook his hand. And in that quiet conference room, something rare happened. A legacy wasn't defended. It was shared without being surrendered. No one said it out loud. But everyone in the room felt it. The meeting didn't end immediately. Papers were adjusted. Laptops closed. Someone asked a procedural question that didn't matter anymore. The conversation had already moved past logistics. What just happened couldn't be put back into an agenda. Arnold sat again. Not at the head of the table this time, but beside it. A small shift, almost invisible, yet unmistakable to anyone who understood rooms like this. Dwayne noticed. He didn't acknowledge it. That restraint mattered. The producer finally spoke. So, creative direction, he said carefully. How do we frame this? Arnold answered first. Not as a passing of the torch, he said. That implies one hand lets go before the other is ready. He glanced at Dwayne. This is alignment, Arnold continued. Two generations choosing not to compete. Dwayne added quietly. And agreeing on where control actually belongs. No one argued, because no one could. This wasn't a power grab. It was clarity arriving early enough to prevent conflict later. As the meeting wrapped, people stood slower than usual. Like they didn't want to break the atmosphere too quickly. They shook hands, gathered their things, exchanged polite smiles that carried more weight than politeness alone. When the room finally cleared, only Arnold and Dwayne remained. Arnold looked around once more, then said, You know what most people get wrong about moments like this? Dwayne waited. They think history is made by winning, Arnold said. It's not. It's made by not needing to. Dwayne nodded. That's usually when it sticks. Arnold smiled, this time fully. Outside the room, assistants and executives resumed their pace. Emails would be sent. Announcements drafted. Headlines eventually written. But none of them would capture what actually happened. Because history hadn't been made in the deal. It had been made in the decision to stand equal without needing to stand above. And that kind of moment doesn't fade. It becomes reference. When they finally stepped out, the hallway felt smaller. Not physically, psychologically. Assistants straightened. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Phones lowered. No one asked how the meeting went. They didn't need to. The answer was already moving through the space. Arnold walked beside Dwayne, not ahead. Not behind. Aligned. At the elevator, Arnold stopped. The doors hadn't opened yet. You know, he said, eyes forward. Most men confuse influence with volume. Dwayne nodded. Volume is expensive, he replied. Influence compounds. Arnold smiled again, this time with something close to relief. I had to learn that late, he said. You learned it early. The elevator arrived. They stepped in. The doors closed. Silence returned, comfortable, earned. Downstairs, the city kept moving. Traffic lights changed. Phones buzzed. Deals continued to be chased and closed. But a different kind of transaction had already happened upstairs. No signatures. No press. No leverage. Just an understanding. In the weeks that followed, decisions came easier. Fewer revisions. Clearer boundaries. When questions arose, they were resolved quickly, because the framework had already been agreed on. People would later say the project felt balanced, grounded, unusually smooth. They'd struggle to explain why. They wouldn't mention the pause after a sentence, the nod that replaced a rebuttal, the moment two generations chose alignment over dominance. But that was the reason. History wasn't made by the announcement. It was made by what never needed to be corrected afterward. And long after the headlines faded, the standard remained, quiet, firm, and unmistakable. Two generations had been in the same room, and instead of colliding, they chose to redefine how power moves forward. Months later, people still talked about that project. Not loudly, not directly. They talked around it. How did that even work? Someone asked in a different meeting about a different film. Two giants. Two eras. The answer was always vague. They respected each other. They were aligned early. They didn't fight for space. None of those explanations captured the truth. Because what actually happened in that room wasn't cooperation. It was recognition. Arnold had seen many men come after him. Some loud. Some eager. Some desperate to prove they were the next version of something he once was. Dwayne wasn't trying to be next. That's what changed everything. He didn't enter the room carrying comparison. He carried authorship. He didn't ask for permission to lead. He didn't challenge the past. He placed himself beside it and made it unnecessary to defend. Arnold felt that immediately. That's why the test wasn't physical. It wasn't verbal. It was structural. Who controls the direction when no one is raising their voice? Who holds the frame when ego would normally fill it? Dwayne answered without realizing he was being examined. By not reacting. By not negotiating his clarity. By not shrinking to accommodate legacy. After that meeting, Arnold stopped being a gate. He became a bridge. That distinction mattered. Because gates slow things down. Bridges move things forward. Years later, when someone asked Arnold what impressed him most about Dwayne Johnson, he didn't mention size, or discipline, or work ethic. He said one thing. He doesn't need the room to agree with him to know where he stands. And that was the moment's real legacy. Not a deal, not a collaboration, but the quiet confirmation that power evolves not by replacing what came before, but by standing steady enough that it no longer needs to be tested. Two generations had shared a room. And history didn't happen because one won. It happened because neither needed to. Years later, no one would remember the exact words spoken in that room. They wouldn't remember who sat where, who spoke first, who paused longer. That's how these moments usually survive. Not as quotes, as consequences. The project went on to succeed, not because it was louder, bigger, or more aggressive than others, but because it moved without friction. Decisions were made early. Lines were clear. No egos leaked into the work. People sensed it. They called it chemistry. They called it luck. They called it timing. But those were just placeholders for something harder to describe. What really happened in that room was simple. A legacy met its future, and neither tried to dominate the other. Arnold Schwarzenegger had spent decades being the reference point, the standard, the shadow others measured themselves against. Most men either fought that shadow or tried to live inside it. Dwayne Johnson did neither. He stood next to it. And that's why it shifted. Because power doesn't get replaced by force. It gets replaced by certainty. Arnold understood that before most people ever do. That's why he recognized it when he saw it. Not threatened. Not defensive. Relieved. Relieved that what he built didn't need protecting anymore. Dwayne didn't walk out of that room having won anything. He walked out having confirmed something he already knew. That the next era doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives prepared. 2 generations were in the same room. History wasn't made by conflict. It was made by alignment, and that's why it lasted. Not as a headline, but as a reference point for how power moves forward when it no longer needs permission. The week after that meeting, Hollywood did what it always does. It looked for the leak. A quote, a headline, a winner, something simple enough to repeat. But nothing came out because nothing in that room was designed for applause. Instead, the effects showed up in behavior. A producer who normally sent 10 follow-up emails sent one. A legal team that usually added, just in case language suddenly asked, do we actually need this? Assistants stopped hovering at doorways waiting for the next wave of ego. They walked with purpose again, like the air was finally breathable. Dwayne noticed it first during the second meeting. Same building, different floor, fewer people. The tone was sharper, not hostile, efficient. When someone tried to soften a decision with vague phrasing, Dwayne didn't argue. He just asked, who owns the call? And waited. The room answered itself. Arnold watched without interrupting. He didn't correct people. He didn't teach. He simply allowed Dwayne's framework to hold. That was the real shift. No one was trying to dominate the structure anymore. They were trying to fit inside it. Afterward, a studio executive pulled Arnold aside near the elevator. You two, how are you making this work? He asked, like it was a magic trick. Arnold didn't smile. We decided early, he said. Most people decide late and call it collaboration. The executive nodded, unsure how to respond. In the hallway, Dwayne kept walking, calm, unbothered. He wasn't collecting credit. He was collecting momentum. And momentum, once clean, becomes hard to stop. That's when the industry began to understand the real reason the meeting mattered. Not because 2 giants met, but because neither one needed to prove he was bigger. Arnold didn't talk about it publicly. He didn't post a photo, didn't tease the collaboration, didn't let the internet turn it into a scoreboard. He'd lived through enough eras to know what hype does. It inflates moments until the truth can't breathe inside them. But privately, the meeting stayed with him, not as nostalgia, as measurement. At home, late one night, Arnold sat at his kitchen table with a glass of water and a stack of notes he rarely touched. Old outlines, old schedules, reminders from a time when every room expected him to be the loudest presence. He remembered the weight of that expectation, not physical, psychological. The constant demand to be the reference point. The strange thing was he didn't miss it. He realized that what he felt after meeting Dwayne wasn't threat. It was relief. Because Dwayne wasn't trying to replace him. He wasn't trying to imitate him. He wasn't even trying to defeat him. He was building something adjacent. Something strong enough that it didn't need Arnold's shadow to look tall. That kind of confidence was rare. Arnold remembered the line Dwayne had said, quiet as a closing door. I don't need to earn it again. The words weren't arrogant. They were simply finished. The kind of certainty that comes from being tested by failure, not complimented by success. A few days later, Arnold ran into an old friend at a charity event. Someone who had seen the industry change 5 times over. The friend leaned in and asked, so, what's he like? Arnold paused before answering. He's not trying to win, Arnold said. He's trying to build something that doesn't need winning. The friend frowned. Isn't that the same thing? Arnold shook his head. No, winning is loud. Building is quiet. Quiet lasts longer. And that was the moment Arnold understood what legacy actually is. Not a throne you defend, but a standard you stop guarding when you finally trust it can survive without you. When the project was finally announced, the headlines did what headlines do. 2 icons team up. Generations collide. The biggest collaboration yet. People argued online about who mattered more, who carried more weight, who deserved the center of the frame. But the people inside the industry watched something else. They watched the absence of chaos. There were no anonymous quotes about creative differences. No whispers of power struggles. No late-night rewrites driven by ego. Meetings ended on time. Decisions were made once. The work moved forward like it had a spine. On set, the dynamic became visible in small moments. Arnold would finish a take, step off the mark, and let Dwayne speak to the director first. Not out of submission, out of trust. Dwayne, in return, never used that space to posture. He used it to clarify. This scene needs less, he'd say. Or, let's keep it honest. And people listened because nothing in his voice asked for attention. It assumed responsibility. One afternoon, a young actor on set watched them from the edge of the monitors and whispered to a crew member, "What's going on between them?" The crew member didn't look up. "They're not competing," he said. "That's what you're feeling." The young actor blinked. "Is that allowed?" The crew member finally looked over. "It is if you're strong enough." That line traveled quietly, the way real truths do. Months later, after the premiere, someone asked Arnold in an interview what surprised him most about working with Dwayne Johnson. Arnold could have mentioned discipline, physicality, star power. He didn't. He said, "He doesn't need you to agree with him to know where he stands." That was the history, not the box office. Not the photos, not the comparisons. Two generations were in the same room, and instead of colliding, they aligned so cleanly that the industry felt the difference before it could explain it. And once you feel that kind of alignment, it becomes a reference point. Not a headline, a standard.